A man bends down and tears a strip of cloth from his body to bind around his wife's thigh. Before going to war, he comforts their mutual concerns in this way. Although his wife is very reluctant for him to join this war, the man, always brave and good at fighting, thinks it's just a common expedition. But what the man could never have anticipated is that this decision would lead to a lifetime of regret. It also inadvertently forged an immortal legend in ancient Roman history.
I am Spartacus!
Indeed, this man is none other than Spartacus, the later god of the arena. He almost single-handedly nearly overturned the entire Roman Empire. And now, I will present to everyone this drama, a favorite of many. Due to its high level of violence and explicit content, many film giants have shied away from it. Therefore, there will be many censored scenes to follow, for which I hope everyone can understand. In 73 BC, the Roman army launched a major campaign into Greece. Due to insufficient combat strength, the Roman general Gladiator persuaded the small Thracian tribes along the way to join the war, and Spartacus was one of them. Spartacus proposed, "As long as you help us annihilate our barbarian enemies, we will join the Roman army." After all, the barbarians often invaded Thracian villages, raping women and brutally killing children, making life miserable for the Thracians. Gladiator agreed to Spartacus's request without hesitation.
Dead. All of them.
After spending a passionate night with his wife Sura, Spartacus set off for the battlefield, but Sura was worried because she had a very ominous dream the night before.
What did they show you?
My husband on his knees, bowing before a great red serpent, the life draining from his veins.
What meaning did you take from it?
A warning. If you go to war, you are destined for great and unfortunate things.
Of course, Spartacus didn't believe in such nonsense. To comfort their mutual concerns, he tied a strip of cloth around his wife's thigh. Seeing her husband's resolute decision, Sura could only reluctantly watch him leave. After their farewell, Spartacus, following the Roman army, was invincible, but in every battle, it was the Thracians who charged into the fray, while the Romans sat back and reaped the benefits. Moreover, the Romans stayed in tents enjoying luxuries, while the Thracians suffered from hunger and cold outside in the winter. Unable to bear it any longer, a Thracian man threw down his bowl in protest. Spartacus hurriedly intervened. After all, they had promised the Romans and must see it through. A fight broke out between the two sides. However, before the fight was over, Gladiator ordered them to scout as an advance party. Climbing up the snowy mountain, they were shocked to find the barbarians planning to raid the Thracian village while they were away. Horrified, Spartacus urgently sought Gladiator, asking him to honor his promise and send troops back to save their people. However, Gladiator had long forgotten his promise. He shouted and ordered them to stand down. It turned out that Gladiator had his own plans all along. After all, the most convenient way to earn military glory was to go to the front lines and repel the Greek army. He couldn't care less about the fate of the Thracians. Gladiator's wife, Ilithyia, came from a very prominent family, and her father was one of the Roman senators. If he could achieve military glory, he could easily ascend to the ranks of the elite. However, the next day when Gladiator asked the Thracians to join him on his expedition to Greece, Spartacus refused his orders on the spot.
You will march where you are commanded!
The situation became extremely tense. Some impulsive Thracians even killed a few Romans. Seeing the guard officer about to return to the camp to report, Spartacus quickly grabbed a spear and struck him down from his horse. The situation had become irreversible, and they had no choice but to flee. But before escaping, Spartacus made a fatal mistake in his soft-heartedness. He didn't kill the unconscious Gladiator. This laid the groundwork for the story that followed. By the time Spartacus returned home, he found the village had been burned to the ground by the barbarians. Fortunately, his timing was just right, and Spartacus managed to rescue his wife, who had survived the attack. But now, with their village destroyed, they became homeless. Their family and friends had all been reduced to slaves of the barbarians. They had no choice but to flee to a cave. Feeling both grateful and sorrowful, after spending a night of intimacy, just as they were basking in each other's warmth, Gladiator had already found them with his soldiers. They captured Sura without explanation, and Spartacus was taken as a slave back to Rome. Since the mercenaries had deserted and killed many Roman soldiers, Glaber had to return early from the battlefield to Rome. The Senate began to doubt Glaber's capabilities. To find a reason to exonerate himself, Glaber blamed everything on the Thracians and sent them to the arena for trial. The ancient Roman arena was a place for slave owners and nobles to watch gladiators fight for entertainment. Nobles sat in the stands, watching slaves kill each other until one side died. To ensure Spartacus's death, Glaber prepared 4 well-equipped and well-trained gladiators for him. For Spartacus, who was new to the arena, it was impossible to stand against 4 skilled gladiators. After being surrounded and easily knocked down, just as Glaber signaled one of his men to finish Spartacus, Spartacus suddenly noticed the red snake on the opponent's shield. This was eerily similar to his wife's dream. Remembering his wife's uncertain fate, he couldn't just die so easily. The primal strength within Spartacus suddenly awakened, and he quickly turned the tables, killing all 4 gladiators. This scene left the audience in the arena utterly astonished. They started shouting, demanding that Spartacus be spared. At this point, General Glaber was fuming with anger, his face turning green, as going against the public's wishes was not a wise move. In this dilemma, a slave owner named Batiatus quickly proposed to buy Spartacus. Batiatus had his own agenda. He always wanted to network with the elite and cleverly realized that Glaber wanted Spartacus dead. However, under the current circumstances, Spartacus's death was impossible. If he bought Spartacus and arranged for him to die in training, it would be an easy task. This would satisfy Glaber's desire and not go against the will of the people. Glaber, seeing some logic in this, reluctantly pardoned Spartacus from death. So, what would become of Spartacus's fate next? In ancient Rome, 2,000 years ago, how much could a slave be worth? They were treated like animals, with wooden boards hanging on their chests indicating their height and weight, their limbs shackled with heavy fetters, standing in a line, waiting for slave owners below the platform to bid on them.
5 denarii.
I grow tired of bidding. 100 denarii.
The Gladiator.
Eventually, this slave owner named Batiatus bought all the slaves for 100 denarii. Typically, slave owners would send their slaves to mines to perform physical labor for life. However, Batiatus had a different plan. He bought these men to train them as gladiators, who would then be sent to the arena to fight brutally until one of them died. This would earn him ticket revenue and betting income from the nobles. He built the training ground on the edge of a cliff, heavily guarded, making it nearly impossible for the slaves to escape. Day after day, the gladiators were brainwashed into believing that dying in the arena was a supreme honor. Becoming a true gladiator was not an easy task. The slaves had to undergo rigorous training and pass tests before being branded with the Batiatus family's mark as a qualified gladiator. Their trainer was a man named Enemaus. Enemaus was fundamentally an upright person. He wanted everyone to train seriously so they could survive in the arena. Obviously, Spartacus, newly brought into the training camp, couldn't accept his status as a slave. No matter what Enemaus said, he stood unmoving. It wasn't until Enemaus suggested sending Spartacus to the mines that Spartacus began to panic. Going to the mines meant that his chances of finding his wife Sura would become even slimmer. With no choice left, Spartacus reluctantly picked up the sword to train. His opponent was the champion gladiator from Capua, Crixus. Crixus's fighting power was formidable, leaving Spartacus no chance to fight back. But Spartacus was not a man to give up easily. Seizing an opportunity when Crixus was distracted, he threw his long sword fiercely at him. Crixus deflected the sword with his own, slashing the throat of a newcomer, killing him instantly. Crixus exploded with anger. Backstabbing was considered the lowest tactic among gladiators. Crixus rushed over, angrily placing his sword on Spartacus's neck. Fortunately, Batiatus didn't let Crixus kill Spartacus. After all, General Glaber was due to visit the next day, and he had to execute Spartacus in the manner Glaber had requested. During lunch, Spartacus faced ostracization from everyone. The person serving food even deliberately poured his meal on the ground. Only one person seemed to sympathize with Spartacus's plight. The man's name was Varro, and he was originally a freeman of Rome. Due to his gambling debts, Varro sold himself into slavery to prevent his family from bearing the burden of his debts. He hoped to win prize money as a gladiator to pay off his debts and buy back his freedom. It turned out that participating in duels did come with a modest prize money, and the more famous the gladiator, the higher the prize money. Therefore, even though they were slaves, gladiators held a somewhat higher status than ordinary slaves. The next day, Glaber visited Batiatus's house and saw Spartacus. Seeing his enemy again, Spartacus wanted to kill Glaber, but at the moment, he needed to find out the whereabouts of his wife, Sura. Seeing Spartacus in such a miserable state, the cruel Glaber didn't want him to die so quickly. The best revenge would be to have Spartacus torn to pieces in the arena. Before leaving, Glaber told Spartacus that his wife had been brutally violated by soldiers and then sold to a Syrian merchant.
To preserve the scent, before my men stained it with their own. She's a savage amusement.
Glaber then callously threw the cloth strip he had taken from Sura onto the ground. Spartacus could only let out a pale, weak roar in response to Glaber's humiliation. During the subsequent training, Spartacus tied the cloth strip around his wrist. Now, all he wanted was to become stronger. At that moment, Glaber passes by outside the arena. Facing his opponent's provocation, Spartacus takes out all his anger on his companion.
Spartacus! Spartacus!
Fortunately, Enemaus intervened in time to pull Spartacus away. In the chaos, the ribbon of Surus fell to the ground. Realizing the significance of the cloth strip to Spartacus, Enemaus later handed it to Batiatus. Batiatus, knowing Spartacus's weakness, promised that if Spartacus trained well and passed the tests to become a true gladiator and earn money for him, he would find a way to bring Spartacus's wife back. For Spartacus at this point, his only hope was to rely on Batiatus. After several days of grueling training, during the final test, the fellow slaves took turns entering the arena. Some died immediately, while others passed the assessment. Finally, it was Spartacus's turn, and his opponent was still the champion, Crixus. Despite Spartacus' high spirits, he's clearly no match for Crixus at this point. Just as Crixus was about to deliver a fatal blow to Spartacus, Spartacus used the cloth strip previously dropped on the ground to overturn Crixus. As Spartacus was about to strike, Batiatus ordered him not to harm Crixus, as Crixus was the training camp's star gladiator.
You have passed the test. Your life now promises meaning. Swear it to me.
I commit my flesh, my mind, my will, to the glory of this ludus and the commands of my master, Gladiatus, or die by the sword.
Batiatus branded Spartacus with the mark of his house. However, what Spartacus didn't know was that the mission of a gladiator was endless slaughter. From this moment on, he became a mere tool for Batiatus to make money.